So the housing market in England is a complete joke. I'm not going to be the first person or the last person that's lost thousands of pounds due to a purchase that's fallen through, and it's no fault of my own. It actually feels like it shouldn't even be legal. Today I'm going to talk about how much money we lost when our house fell through. Hi, my name's Corinne. I'm a full-time blogger and content creator from York. I've just started this new YouTube channel to document our journey of moving house. When I eventually do end up moving house, I'll be sharing everything that we do to the house to renovate, decorate and make the house our home. So honestly, selling and buying this house has been the most stressful time of my life. We started this process in January of this year and we're now on house number 2. It's October, so 10 months later, and we still don't have a completion date, and the whole thing has just been really stressful. Like, when you think it can't get any worse, it actually does. But anyway, that's for a different video. I'll park that for now. What I want to do is talk about what happened when we pulled out of our first house, why that happened and how much it cost us. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk about the English housing market in general and some things that I think are really wrong with it, and just how it causes a lot of stress, and it causes a lot of people to lose money when in other countries the process is a lot more simple and it's a lot quicker as well. So if you already know about the housing market in England and you just want to know about the figures, just skip ahead to the chapters below. So the housing process in England is often criticised just because it takes a lot of time, there's a lot of process, there's a lot of stress for sellers and buyers, and there's also like a lot of people holding the cards to the chest, so you don't always know what people are thinking, you don't know, if somebody else is going to come in, offer a higher price and the seller will go with them instead. There's a lot of time pressure and like, we will walk away if you don't do X. It can get quite nasty and it can get very stressful. And obviously these are really, really big decisions. Buying your house and where you're going to live, it's going to be the most important decision and the most money you're probably ever going to spend in your life. So, there's high emotions, it can be time sensitive, especially if you're in a chain where you've got multiple people waiting for a house to complete, so then they can then complete the chain and everything can complete at the same time. There's just a lot of stress with it. And other countries, they don't have that at all. They do things differently and in a better way, I think. When you buy a house, it's sold as seen. So essentially, when you put an offer in on a house, you go and view it and then you put your offer in. And then if you want to check that your investment is safe, it's up to you as the buyer to get a structural survey that can cost thousands, to get surveys on the back of that. If you want to get the electrics checked out or if you want to get the boiler checked out, it's up to you to check that. And then you have to pay for those surveys and then decide if you want to go forward. So there's already a lot of money on the table and a lot of time on the table before you're actually bound into a contract where there's no chance of the purchase selling through. And at any point before you exchange contracts, the buyer or the seller can pull out. So you can be months and months down the line and then one of you can just decide, actually, don't fancy it anymore. I'm just gonna pull out. And then you still have to pay all the legal fees, and then anything that you've spent on surveys and things is completely lost. So one thing that can happen is gazumping. So this is when you put an offer in on a house and the offer gets accepted, and then you instruct your solicitor to go forward with the purchase. And once you instruct your solicitor, you have to start paying your solicitor, and then you have to pay them for any work that they carry out. But then if somebody else comes along and offers a higher price than you, then the seller may change their mind and sell it to them instead. And this means that you've wasted your time, you've wasted your money. And then as well, if you've got a property that you're selling and your buyer is relying on you to move into a different house, that holds all that up as well. So that's when things can get really complicated. And the opposite can happen as well, where you get really far down into the process, you're close to exchanging contracts, so you've done all the checks, you've paid for all your searches, you've paid for everything, and then the buyer may turn around to the seller and say, actually, we've decided that we're not going to go forward unless you reduce the price by £20,000. If you don't do it, we'll walk away. And by that point, the seller is already financially invested, and especially if they've got an onward purchase again that they want to get into, if they lose you as the buyer, they will lose their onward purchase. So it puts people in a really difficult position. So obviously it's a bit of a dick move to do that, but people do it because obviously it's a lot of money. But in my opinion, I don't think you should be doing that unless you are really clear about why you're doing that. So for example, if you do get a structural report and that's saying that there's something really wrong with the property that's going to cost a lot of money to fix, that's the only time you really should be asking for a price reduction. If you're going to wait to the last minute and try and do it as a mind game, then I think that's really unethical. So yeah, another really awful and stressful thing. It's just the lack of transparency. So you don't really know what the other people are thinking, you don't know what their situation is, you don't know if they're going to turn around and ask for a reduction, or the seller's going to sell it to somebody else. So, and there's just like a lot of stress, just because it's like such a big purchase and such a big deal. And then as well with solicitors, it's really difficult to get the attention of your solicitor. They take on a lot of cases at once. They're probably a little bit immune to like the stress that people feel, because I assume that they have a lot of people on at them all the time saying, we need you to look at this, we need to get this sorted out urgently. So I would guess that they come a little bit numb to it and just kind of like used to people shouting at them. So even though you might be thinking that this is actually really urgent, it might not be the most urgent thing that your solicitor's got on right now. And that's really difficult, because when you're the person in that situation, obviously it's really hard for you, and you really want everyone else just to listen and to reply to you quickly, but it just doesn't happen. Solicitors do not reply quickly. Often solicitors will only reply one sentence to a full email. The whole thing is just really frustrating, and that only causes more and more stress, and you just don't know where you are. And there are times as well where solicitors are doing things in the background, and they're actually doing quite a lot in the background, but they don't update you, so you don't know. And then you can be stressing because you think that nothing's happening when actually things are happening, they've just not updated you. So the communication and the transparency is just really broken. So another issue that can happen is with mortgages. So once you put an offer in a house, you apply for a mortgage and that has to get accepted. What we did is we spoke to a mortgage advisor. We knew what we could borrow. We actually borrowed a lot less than we could, just because we wasn't comfortable in borrowing that amount of money, and we didn't want really high monthly repayments. So we personally had no issue getting our mortgage accepted. But even if they accept your mortgage, they still have to do a valuation on the house. So if the mortgage company says that the house that you're buying is not worth the price that you're paying for it, they can decline your mortgage. So that would mean you either have to pull out of the house, or you have to try and get the seller to renegotiate the price, or you can try another mortgage company. When we bought the house that we live in now 5 years ago, we actually got selected for a random audit. So this meant that we had to have extra checks done on our mortgage application before it got approved. And it became quite stressful because they were trying to contact our employers to get certain information, and like to try and get that information to them was really difficult. It all got worked out in the end, but it was about 5 or 6 weeks before we got our mortgage application approved, whereas for the house that we're buying now, it was about a week before it was approved. I've already touched on this, but there is the financial risk that you have when you buy a house and when you sell a house, because as soon as you instruct solicitors, unless you have a solicitor that is a no move, no fee type of solicitor, you have to pay them. And that's what happened to us. We had to still pay our solicitor for the house that we pulled out of, even though we didn't actually buy it because we were that far down in the process. So we lost that. And we also had to pay for the survey, which we got. And then obviously it was useless to us because we wasn't buying the house anymore. And it is such a risk because you just don't know what's going to happen. You could lose your job, or your circumstances change, and then you have to pull out of the house, and again you lose that money. Now there is something called buyer's insurance, and I'm quite annoyed because I didn't know about this, and I am very, very risk averse when it comes to money, and I feel like it's something that I should have known about, but I didn't, and not one person told us about it. So estate agents, mortgage advisor, life insurance guy, solicitors, nobody once mentioned that we could get home buyers insurance. And when I've spoke to people afterwards and I've said to them, you can get home buyers insurance to protect you if your house falls through, and they all say, no, I didn't know that. So it seems like it's not that known, but it's something that exists. Now I'd rather pay £100, £200 or whatever, and risk losing that if we don't have to claim on the insurance, than get stuck and end up paying thousands. So our situation. So we withdrew from the property, so it was our choice to pull out, but we felt that we had no option. It really was the most stressful things that we've ever done. It was a very stressful week. We took a lot of time to think about it. We went back to the property and had a look around the area. We spoke to our solicitor about it beforehand. I was on the phone to our estate agents a few times, just going through it and reasoning with them. I spoke to our surveyor on the phone for 45 minutes, describing the issues that we'd uncovered. And essentially it was the best thing for us to do to pull out of that property. So we started this process in January of this year, and that is when we spoke to our mortgage advisor, gave him all our financial information, and then he told us what we could borrow. And then from that we spoke to some estate agents, got them to come around and have a look, value the property, tell us what they would charge us, and then we picked our estate agent. We then paid for a photographer to come around, take the photos, and then we were on the market at the start of February. It actually felt like we were on the market for a long time. When you're selling your house, it really feels like no one's ever going to buy your house, and every time you get a viewing and people don't put an offer in, it just feels so disappointing, especially because you work so hard to like clean beforehand and make it look as nice as it possibly can. So in the end, we had 10 viewings. We actually had 14 booked, but quite a lot of people cancelled. So we had 14 booked, 4 of those cancelled, and 1 person put an offer in, and it was on the market a total of 50 days before we got the offer accepted, which actually isn't too bad. We were so happy when we accepted that offer because we kind of felt like things were lining up right for us wanting to move for the summer. And we felt that things would be a little bit easier from now because we no longer had to try and keep our house as tidy as possible and be ready to like clean it and tidy it, which is difficult when you've got a 3-year-old, but we managed, and then we were just glad that we didn't have to do that anymore and things might be a little bit easier. But we were wrong, of course. So while we were selling our house, we was already looking at the market every day, seeing what was coming on, and we had 2 houses that we wanted to view. So we booked a few days later to go and see these 2 houses, and then I absolutely fell in love with one. My husband really loved it as well, so we put the offer in, and of course we put the offer in on Easter bank holiday weekend, which meant that we had to wait until Tuesday to find out, and then we did find out that we did get accepted. Although somebody else did put an offer in which was higher than ours, they weren't proceedable, so they'd not sold their house yet, so we were the people that they went with in the end. So we started the process, and then this is the start of us investing money into this, which we would never see again. So we instructed our solicitor to start the process. We filled in all the paperwork for both the sale of our house and the purchase of our onward purchase. So this means that we pay 2 fees. So we pay the solicitor a separate fee for the sale of this house, and we pay them also for the house that we're purchasing. Yeah, so we started that process, and because the house we were getting, it was a cottage in the middle of Yorkshire in the countryside. It was lovely, but it was built in like 1870. So because it was quite old, we decided that we would go ahead and get a full structural survey. So when you get a survey, there's like 3 levels you can get. So we got the one that was most expensive just because it was such an old house and we felt like that was a good investment to make. So when you get a survey, what happens is somebody goes around, spend a few hours at the property. They can't like move things and like take carpets up and like look behind things and stuff like that. All they do is they give like a visual look and what they can access at the time. They look at the roof, they look inside the roof, they look at insulation, they look at any potential structural issues, they look at the electrics, the boilers, the windows, just anything that may cost you money. And then you get a report from that telling you what was wrong. And it was actually quite a frustrating report because the report like doesn't actually say this is wrong. It says this may be an issue. You have to then get another survey with somebody else to find out if this issue is right. So we came back with a list of next steps and how much things could potentially cost us. And then we can decide if we want to pay further people to go in and inspect these certain things and give us like a better answer. So one of the things in the survey is that there was a structural beam that needed replacing in the living room, and it was an estimated cost of £5,000. Because we offered under the asking price, we decided that we wouldn't renegotiate the price, and we were happy to take that cost on ourselves because we really like the house. So yeah, we spent the next few weeks planning our life there. I visited the local school, we got our son signed up. You know, I joined other Facebook groups, I looked around the area, I was on Google Maps looking at walks and things like that. So, you know, we were emotionally invested in as well. We were gearing up to exchange contracts, so getting pretty close to the end, when on the local Facebook page that I joined, I saw a picture of the street that we were moving on to completely underwater, and you could see our house in the background, and you could see that the road where the house is and the drive had all water on it. And this was from last year. So I ended up contacting the guy privately, and it turned out that there's quite a big problem with flooding in the area. So on the legal paperwork that our seller had to fill in when he was asked about flooding, he said that there was a large puddle on the drive in October of last year, but it didn't affect the house and it didn't affect any access to the house, and everything was okay with it. So it was like, you know, it's just a puddle, that's not really a big deal. But we then uncovered photos, because this guy sent us more photos across different years of just the whole road being underwater. We've got photos of where you can see the house. It's like taken from the house next door, and you can see the house that we were buying. All the garden is underwater. The water is up to the walls of the house, and it was all down the driveway. There's a photo of somebody stood next to the house opposite, and the water is up to their thighs. And it's really hard to believe that if water is up to somebody's thighs, that it's not got into the house. There were photos of fire engines there with the pumps, unable to pump the water because it puts risk on a bigger residential area. There are photos of people going past the house in a boat, even though our seller said that there was no access issues. And then we uncovered quite a lot, actually. I'm reluctant to say too much about it just because of like the legal implications. But in terms of like calling it out, I did tell the estate agent that was selling the house and the solicitors everything. They got all the photos, and they legally have to tell anybody else that's interested in the house if they ask like why we pulled out. But I can't really start like a hate campaign and like start kicking off about it just because I'm unsure of the legal implications, and I don't want to put myself through that situation because it's been stressful enough. So that is up to them as the professional people. But what I will say is that the property did go on the market at £50,000 less. And I know that there were 3 offers put in, so I don't think he would have an issue selling it at the price that we did. So I do believe that he'd been told he needs to reduce the price and he needs to be honest about it on the legal paperwork. So we did go back and visit the property, like without their knowledge. The seller didn't live there, so we could like go and just like look on the street just because we wanted to see like, is it on a hill? Does it dip down? Like, you know, like what the risks are that way. And we still just didn't feel comfortable with it. At the end of the day, it felt like every time it would rain, we'd be worried. So the issues are to do with flash flooding when the drains are really old and it can't cope. So when there's a certain amount of rainfall in a short amount of time, the drains are all back up, and it's all sewerage as well, so it's not even like clean water, and it would just like completely destroy the house, and we can't take that financial risk. And when we went back and did some more insurance quotes, knowing this information now, we only got back 6 insurance companies that would touch us, and it would be £4,000 a year to insure. Bearing in mind the house we're in now costs about £120 a year to insure. So, you know, it was clearly going to be a no-go for us. And yes, what the seller put on the legal paperwork was a lie, but because we'd not yet exchanged contracts, that wasn't legally binding, so we couldn't claim any money back off him because it wasn't a legally binding contract yet. But if we had have exchanged contracts, then we could have tried to sue him or get him to do like a reverse transaction or something, because he did lie on that. But that would have been probably a long process, and we may have had to move in anyway and then do that afterwards. So even though we lost money, I'm glad that we found out the issue before it was too late. Right, so then that comes down to what did we lose when we pulled out of this house. So we had to pay the solicitor fees at a cost of £895.76. We had to pay the surveyor £1,200. There was also a knock-on effect of the mortgage we're paying now. So because our low fixed rate ended in May, that means that we're now on a high tracker mortgage. So we're paying a really high rate at the moment because we can't fix a deal because we're moving house again. So we're paying like £500 more a month. But actually I think if we're saying what the rates would be if we had locked in, we're paying about an extra £200 more than what we should do a month. And also the new house that we're moving into is further away, so that means that the movers are charging us an extra £100. So that means so far we have lost a total of £2,995.76. But I will also say as well, like, if you're thinking, how did it get this far without knowing about the floods? There is something that I can't talk about legally that caused it not to be flagged, and also our solicitor forgot to send us the flood risk report when she sent us our searches. You know, you might say, well, you should know, you should have asked about it. We bought this house as a new build 5 years ago, and the process was a lot more simple. We don't have experience in buying houses. We wasn't sure at the time what actually the searches would include. So when our solicitor sent us an email saying, these are all the searches and these are all the replies to the inquiries, we took her word as our solicitors that everything was okay. And if there was an issue somewhere, then it would be her job to flag that. And obviously that didn't happen. So that's another thing that caused it to go on for so long. But at that point, by the time she sent the searches, we would have already had the survey done and we've already instructed her, so we would have still lost the money. We just would have had an extra like 4 weeks to probably pull out and then find somewhere else. And luckily for us, our buyer did stay with us, because if our buyer decided to walk away, she didn't want to wait for us to find somewhere new, that would have cost us an additional £1,098 in solicitors' fees for the selling of this house. So we're now in the process of buying our next house, so we have to pay all these fees again. And again, if something else happens to this house, we're going to have to pay again. And if we do decide to still move, we're going to have to pay them again. So as you can see, it's a huge financial risk, and that's what makes it so stressful, as well as the emotional investment you've got and all the time you waste as well. Yeah, so let's hope that we get some good news about this new house soon, because I cannot cope with this happening again.